shaming is when you are being asked to do more than what you've signed up for. So let's be very clear. You're doing your job. You're doing all the tasks that you've been asked to do. Nothing is being, ignored or forgotten. You're doing your job. But when you're asked to do more with the understanding that if you don't, you're not a team player. If you don't, you might not be the person people call on next time. It's when someone else puts their own capacity for work on you as if it should be what it is for all people.
Isn't that every church and every nonprofit, Arianna?
Well, maybe.
Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. I'm so glad you joined us. Hey, you know what? You are not your work. We are going to talk about toxic calling. Do you know that even if you're called by God, it can be toxic? Well, and we're going to talk about all that with Dr. Arianna Molloy. I've also got a book giveaway. This week, I'm giving away Arianna's book, Healthy Calling: From Toxic Burnout to Sustainable Work. 5 lucky winners are going to get a copy. To enter, all you have to do is comment, "I have a healthy calling," down below. So just do that and like, subscribe, leave a comment to join the conversation. Now, a word from today's partners, and then we'll dive right into my conversation with Dr. Arianna Molloy. This episode is brought to you by Upward Sports. So Upward Sports equips churches to share the gospel and make connections in their community. Upward gives you all the training, all the resources, the ministry content, products, and specialized league management systems to help you run a sports ministry. It's so much bigger than sports, though, because here's really the heartbeat behind it. What they're into is reaching people. They want to help you reach people like never before. They will introduce you to people who don't go to church, who would never show up at church if it wasn't for the fact that you run a sports ministry. So if you're interested in reaching people that are really hard to reach, here's what you do. Simply go to upward.org/Carey. That's upward.org/Carey. They would love to help you out. Hey, this episode is brought to you by the Art of Leadership Academy. So if this podcast is part of your growth and rhythm in leadership, I think you're going to love what I'm going to share with you. Inside my Art of Leadership Academy, we have just opened up a few brand new spaces for you to lead more effectively and grow your leadership. And the price, you're going to love it. It's absolutely free. So what I would love for you to do is go and set up your free account today, because you're going to be able to join a life-giving online community. Think social media, but only for pastors and church leaders who are looking to grow and support each other. You can cut the noise, the trolls, the junk you get everywhere else. Actually, it's just a community of church leaders who really care about the mission of the church. I would love for you to be involved. And the big part of this is you'll be able to connect with other podcast listeners about each episode of my podcast, including me. I'm going to be active on there. You'll get exclusive insights by asking questions, sharing insights, and learning how others are applying what they're learning on this podcast to real life situations in their church and ministry or their business. So everything you get will help you lead more effectively, to grow faster and thrive in life and leadership. I'd love for you to get started today. And here's how you do it. Create a free account. It's pretty simple. Click the link in the description of this episode or visit theartofleadershipacademy.com. Couple clicks, you're in. It's free. Look forward to seeing you inside. Well, Arianna, it's a delight to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Yeah. So you've spent years studying calling, and I want to jump into the deep end because I feel like I've got a calling on my life. How did calling become toxic?
Deep end. Let's do it.
Yeah. No small talk. Okay, let's go right for the jugular.
Yeah.
How does
so
calling
if
become
we're going to
toxic?
jump right in, really where we want to start is when calling becomes more interesting or more of a focus to us than our caller, then we start to get off track. So when we begin to focus more on the calling, which is the thing, versus the caller, we get off track.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, because, I was somebody who just wanted to be a lawyer. That was my story from the time I was a kid. But it was between first and second year law that I had a calling experience. And I did not come from a charismatic background. I was raised Presbyterian, sort of the opposite of, if you need an antonym for charismatic, it would be Presbyterian. But God, and I'm very open to that stuff, but God really moved supernaturally and I think put a call in my life. It was shocking to me, surprising to me. And I would say there were points at which my calling became toxic. Hopefully not so much now. What are some signs that maybe your calling has gone into a not very healthy direction?
Well, first of all, I love those crystallizing moments where you can look back and say, oh my gosh, this was a moment where I felt that Holy Spirit presence that is undeniable. And those are very real moments. I also think when we're talking about calling, though, we have to remember that by and large, it's like smaller whispers along the way. It's doors that we have the courage to walk through or knock on when they're closed. And collectively, sometimes that helps us understand and discern our calling, you know? I definitely have had those moments too, Carey. I remember walking on the campus of Biola University. I had no intention of living in California, not at all interested. I'm from Seattle, where pine trees, fill the scented air, and I love it. But I was taking the interview, and I was walking on campus, and I remember exactly where I was standing.
Mm-hmm.
And I had that like soft Holy Spirit feeling in my heart that was, I can only describe it as like a key going into a lock and unlocking with this sense of peace that just flowed over me. And I called my dad and I was like, I don't think I'm coming home. So just to say, like, there are those crystallizing moments. But I think sometimes we get so curious about having those moments that we miss those other little parts along the way.
Yeah, and a lot of the people listening to this show, the leaders listening, would say they have a calling on their life, right? Whether that was a charismatic moment like me or a feeling like yours, or just like, hey, I signed up for ministry. I think I have the gifting. I have a calling. But a lot of pastors and church leaders become kind of obsessed with calling. And so when you look at when a calling becomes toxic, what does that look like? So obviously you focus more on the calling than the caller, but talk to church staff, if they're working with a senior pastor whose calling has become toxic, how would they know?
Okay, so the good news is people who feel called are the most satisfied and motivated in the workplace. They're the people you want in the room. But the bad news is that toxic side, they're actually the most prone to having that sense of burnout than any other people group. And so I think as we're talking about this, we have to kind of assume for most people who feel called, it's not really a question of if, it's a question of when we get to that toxic side. Now, we can either be consumed by that sense of toxicity, that particular type of burnout with a calling that has its own texture, or we can say, oh, this is not a good feeling. Yeah. I need to do something different. So I would say the first thing to realize is if you're recognizing that sense of toxic calling, which is when work moves from an expression of who you are to the definition of who you are. When we're beginning to recognize that, know that it's not going to go away on its own. Okay. Burnout does not go away on its own. We have to do something about it. So it's not something to be like, oh, well, I'll take care of this when this next campaign is over, or I'll take care of this when this next season is over. There's times where you have to schedule it in, but it is not going to go away on its own.
So burnout, that's something we talked about from time to time on this podcast. I would say, I don't know how, I definitely burned out. That was almost 20 years ago, but I don't know there was a calling thing or whether it was just me being super driven dude who had no brakes, just a gas pedal. That was my 30s, all gas pedal, no brakes. And then at 40, I kind of hit a wall and fell off the cliff. If it becomes related to burnout, talk to the leaders who are listening. How do they know that they've crossed a line? What signs are they looking for?
Good. And I love that you distinguished. There's a lot of types of burnout. Burnout has been in our vocabulary a lot in the last 5 or 6 years with, the lockdown pandemic and different societal changes. And so burnout is definitely getting some spotlight, as it should. And regular burnout is a terrible feeling. It can include psychological paralysis, apathy, cynicism, emotional and mental fatigue to the point where all you want to do is lay in bed. But of course, that's not satisfying. Or you might sit in your car before going to work and just sort of scroll all the things you can scroll on your phone so that you're not leaving. And it's not good. So I just want to acknowledge that. Burnout is a terrible, terrible feeling.
Yeah.
It is a deep sense of, I don't like what I'm doing anymore. And I don't know what to do with that. But burnout from a calling is different.
Okay.
Burnout from a calling is not, I don't like what I'm doing anymore. It's, I don't know who I am anymore. And the reason for that is when we go back to that sense of calling is about relationship with three different people, essentially. Calling is about relationship with ourselves. We're the called. So that's called intrapersonal communication. That's communication. You might talk to yourself when you're like brushing your teeth or going for a walk and you're saying certain things to yourself about yourself. So that's intrapersonal communication. Calling also involves the caller, which is God.
Mm-hmm.
But calling also involves community. It's the community that we serve, how they react to it, and also the community that impacts us. So our support system. So the reason that burnout from a calling is a toxic kind of burnout is that there's an element of what psychologists call deep shame. It's a emotional and spiritual level of shame that what used to feel like a sacred gift, where you were connected to the caller and making a difference in your community, you no longer want to do or have the capacity to do. And that shame can be so corrosive to the core of who we are. So that's, it's a little bit different than just regular burnout.
Let's drill down on shame.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So we can all experience different types of shame moments. I mean, the great Brene Brown talks a lot about that in her research on vulnerability. But shame as it relates to calling involves a spiritual labor that really takes us off our path with our caller. And it feels like there's nothing you can do about it. You can't tell anybody about it. Oh my gosh, this thing that God has me doing that's so important that I can feel the need with, I don't want to do it anymore.
So is it like you're faking it then? There's this cognitive dissonance between how you feel on the inside and what you're projecting on the outside. You're up there Sunday, the sermon was good, but meanwhile, you're flat as a pancake inside emotionally? Like what is, just break it down so I understand it.
Yeah. There is absolutely emotional labor. Emotional labor is real. I mean, people who work at Disney, I'm in California, they know emotional labor very tangibly. There's emotional labor in the medical field. I work with hospitals in terms of burnout issues, and you talk to them and they have to go in and treat people. And if they even try to take a break or talk about taking a break, the idea is someone could literally die. You work with educators who are constantly on the front lines with the development of children and adolescents and young adults. And I think with pastors in particular, or explicit ministry, not only is there emotional performance, but there's spiritual performance. You are meant to lead as a whole person. You are invited into space to lead your whole self. And so when there's a disruption there, you have to not only bottle up emotionally, you have to bottle up spiritually.
I think a lot of people can resonate with that. So if I hear you on what you're saying, because I know that's an issue even in retirement for leaders. It's like, I'm called to this. So they're 82 and perhaps their performance started declining 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Performance is the wrong term, but you know what I mean? Like they're just not as effective in their calling, but I'm called to this and you're going to take me out in a pine box. Like I run into that a lot. Even when I stepped out of the lead pastor role at 50, so many people said, "Are you abandoning your calling?" And I'm like, "No, I think I'm moving into a new phase of it." And now I serve leaders. This is what I do, right? I'd like you to talk about that. Like, what happens when you hang on too long, or when you're in that shame spiral, and you don't feel it anymore? But let's be honest, you feel called, or you need the money. What do you do?
That's real.
Because I think that's very real.
Yeah. So again, I love that question. And I think it's so tempting to get distracted by the calling. But again, we have to go back to the fact that it's relationship. What are relationships? Are relationships static? Do they stay the same? They shouldn't. They should absolutely grow. They change in seasons. You know, my son is going to have a birthday in 2 days, and I cannot believe that he's getting so big. I was looking at pictures of him and he was just a baby like 2 seconds ago.
Yeah.
But he changes. And I think the deception is, as adults, we don't change physically quite as drastically as you do when you're in adolescence, but we change. Our calling is going to change. Our caller does not change. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And that deep core part of our calling might be the same, but it will be expressed differently depending on the season that we're in. It is a dynamic process. And so I will go on campus a couple times, like maybe every 2 or 3 years before the start of the semester, and I'll hold my hands out. And I love my job, Carey. I love my job. But I'll hold my hands out and I will say, Father, do you still want me here? Because I don't want to be here if you don't want me here. I love what I'm doing. I really can't imagine doing anything else. But if you want me to go somewhere else, take me there because I want to be where you are calling me. And it is a scary, scary prayer. I'm an Enneagram 6, so safety and security is my jam. So to pray that is a lot for me.
How do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, I love that question. I think that my response probably is a little bit metaphysical, but I first sort of feel that presence in my spirit because I think the Holy Spirit is living and active. I'm also a big fan of, I think Annie F. Downs talked about this in one of her podcasts, but building your own board. So having a personal board of directors is so essential. If I could say anything today, it would maybe be that. To have a healthy calling, you must have accountability for how you pursue it, how you live it out, and how you treat others according to that calling. And so your board of directors needs to be 3 to 5 people who you know will tell you the honest truth, whose lives are full of integrity, and you want your life to mirror them in some way or another. And they have the freedom to speak into what you're saying. Now, I also want to have an asterisk there, if that's okay, because I know we don't all have this great community. I think there have been seasons in my life where the people on my board were not people I knew. So like C.S. Lewis was totally on my board of director in college, right? I'm reading his literature and I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I would have appealed to his literature as a checking point for myself. But I think, how do you know? I think you got to talk about it with people.
How do you select good board of director members? I'm in the process of assembling a new board right now. Actually, it's funny that you mentioned that. And I've had that over the years. And I guess, tell me if I'm reading too much into it, but sometimes your board of directors gives you permission to do things that you will not give yourself permission to do, like quit or step back or stay in when you want to quit, but that's actually not the right move, right? It's an objective perspective beyond you, your wife, and your dog, or whatever. I don't have a dog, but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah. So, and it's interesting because I remember when I was given the opportunity to write this book on healthy calling, I immediately went to my people. I went to my board, and the majority of them were like, you have to do this. And I didn't want to, actually. I was very afraid. And it was a really hard time in my own life. I was experiencing life burnout when I was given this opportunity, which is different than calling burnout, but they can impact each other. But a few of them actually said, I don't think you should do it right now. And so that was even more confusing. So I had to take a step back and remember why I put them on my personal board. There were some that I asked because I loved how they loved their families. There were some that I asked because I loved how they did their job. There were some that I asked because I liked how they paid attention to how the Holy Spirit moved in their life. And so I think even recognizing the role that you're looking for to fill in your personal board. And I don't know, maybe this is just me. I don't think any one person can fill all of that. I think only Jesus can do that. And so in the past, I think it's been a mistake for me personally to rely on one person to have full authority in, helping guide my thinking. I think you need a collection of people. I think it's in Proverbs that says a wise king has wise counselors,
How frequently does your board meet?
Yeah. So I would say right now it's kind of an informal board. So I don't meet with them together.
Okay.
I meet with them individually, and I make sure that I'm meeting with one of them once a week. So
that's pretty frequent.
Yeah, I'm a relational person. I like to check in. Now, if I have a big decision then I will immediately send out an email to all of them together and say, here's what I'm working through. Can you pray for me and pray with me? And I'd love to chat with you about that. But I think in other seasons of my life where I was really going through some decision-making discernment, I would say once a month was when I made sure to check in with everybody. Right now, I'm a checker-inner. So like, I like to at least check in with one of them a week and be like, okay, here's my high point of the week and my low point of the week. This is where I'm at right now, and just kind of bounce things off of them.
What was your life burnout like?
Yeah, it's been an interesting, I'm at the early stages of midlife, and I feel like no one tells you about that season. Everyone talks about adolescence, they talk about early adulthood and even like early parenting or being single in longer stages of your life. I was the last one to get married in my social group and the last one to have a child. So I remember all of those things. I don't think I was prepared for the Panini generation experience where we had a young kid and our parents all had pretty significant health issues arise. Mm-hmm. And during an economic shift, job changes were happening in my family. And so I remember driving down the freeway and knowing that my mom, who'd just been diagnosed with MS, had recovered from cancer. Wow. My dad had this big back injury. My mother-in-law has Alzheimer's. I mean, there's just like a lot, right? My father-in-law had 2 strokes in 2 years. I mean, it's just so much. And I felt that Holy Spirit tap of like, hey, you need to probably talk to somebody about this stress. But I will say this, what landed me in life burnout was, I think I was riding on the adrenaline of pushing through. I think that adrenaline of pushing through for high capacity people, it feels good.
It does. If you're motivated and driven.
I can't believe we did this.
Yeah. I'm stronger. I'm better. I'll do it.
Yeah. And so I think that is a romantic notion we probably need to get off of our plate. It's not romantic to push through. It does feel good, but that's not the way everyday life is supposed to be.
How did the signs show up in your life that told you I have a problem?
I went to the ER 4 times in 2 months. They thought that I was having a panic attack. I wasn't. As it turns out, I had a herniated disc in my neck, and I had just been ignoring the pain because I'd had it for a while. And it started pressing against a nerve that went all the way down my left arm and mimicked a sense of a heart attack. But I'm not in that stage really where that should be the case. And
no, so you're too young for that.
Thank you. And so they were like, oh, it was probably just a panic attack. And so I went back. They actually thought that they saw a blood clot in my arm. So they gave me blood thinners, and it was awful, Carey. I thought, because they didn't know why I had this blood clot. And so I thought, am I going to die? Wow. And I remember that was a really strong crisis, not a crisis of faith. I knew Jesus was with me, but like a feeling of helplessness. Like
so your body was starting to show the signs of the emotional stress that you were carrying.
The Lord used it so much. I had to change a lot of things. And the 19th doctor I saw, who was a vein specialist, said, you've been misdiagnosed. You don't have a blood clot. Get off the blood thinner. And what was really cool? He was a believer. I was in his office and he was saying to me, he was like, so tell me about the work that you do. And I was like, I'm a professor at Biola. And he's like, so are you a believer? And I said, yes. And I was exhausted at this point, and he said, well, let me tell you something. God's got you. The fire will not touch you. You've been misdiagnosed. Get off the medication. And I just started bawling my eyes out.
Oh man.
So that was life burnout. I will say at the time, I was loving my job. My job wasn't burning me out. But it was life.
But there must have been I understand the physical pain. And I think every year we seem to understand the link between the emotional, spiritual burden we're carrying and our physical bodies. It is way more tied than I would have guessed 20 years ago. And I think many people would have guessed 20 years ago. But there must have been other signs too. Like you mentioned a few earlier. What were the softer signs apart from the physical pain and symptoms that showed that I'm not thriving right now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, I'm being totally candid with you about this whole interview. So there you go. This is, vulnerability moment. I remember because I had a child later in life. And so my career was very much thriving when I had my son. And when I came back to work after I had my son, it felt really hard to balance that role of parent and work. And I remember I met with several female faculty and said, "How are you doing this? Like, what are you doing?" And what was interesting is their advice was great, but they were all young moms when they had their kid, and I wasn't. And so it didn't relate to me. I also have a fantastic spouse who he is textbook Enneagram 3 achiever. His joy is just accomplishing things, and he's an all-in parent, but he definitely was also very busy and doing things in his life. And so I began to feel like people thought I wasn't working hard enough. That was my own insecurity. And so I said yes to a lot of things that did not bring me life at work. And I remember talking to my husband on the way to work one day, and he said, "Hey, just checking in with you right now. How much of your job feels like a calling?" Because he knows how important that is to me. And I remember pausing and saying, I think only about 40% right now. And we both at the same time breathed out and said, "That's not good." And so even rerouting that, and I took time and I talked with my advisory board and just said, "I think I need to say no to some things. I think I don't actually feel burnt out, but the thing that makes my calling feel alive is not getting any of the attention. I'm doing all these other things." And so I needed to rearrange some stuff.
It's interesting. I'll test a theory I have with you because I'm not a psychologist, do not have a PhD, blah, blah, blah. But when I wrote my last book, At Your Best, I talked about what I call full out burnout, which is basically where your body stops. You don't declare a finish line, but like you said earlier, you can barely get out of bed in the morning. You're staring at a blinking cursor most of the day. You got brain fog, like you're just not functioning. And that's what happened to me in 2006. But just talking to thousands of leaders about this, I had a working definition, again, non-medical, that I just call low-grade burnout. And it's basically, my definition is some of the symptoms of burnout are present, but you're still functioning. So the functions of life continue, but the joy of life is gone. The joy of your calling, and listen, we're all grown-ups. There are good days and there are bad days. There are days where I feel like working.
Good day, 80% will feel like you're calling, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But I wonder if that's what you're driving at a little bit, right? That you can continue functioning, but you've got the shame spiral. You've got all of these things happening that maybe are not the best. Any thoughts on that? Whether it's kind of I'm functioning, but I'm also probably a little bit burned out?
Sure. Well, I think one of the big eye-opening things, and by the way, I've been honored to share a bit about my own life, but prior to me experiencing burnout, I studied it for many, many years. And so, all the data,
doctor becomes the patient. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was kind of ironic. I'm like, oh, I'm experiencing this, check. Oh my gosh, this whole list I'm experiencing, how did I get here? But I think part of it is I thought for the longest time that burnout was a category. Burnout is a spectrum. So if you can imagine for a minute, on one side, you've got healthy calling, healthy life, healthy whatever. And on the other side, you've got burnout or even toxic burnout. So now, honestly, every single day, I take a minute and think, where would I place myself on that line? Because if we wait until we actually feel the consequences of burnout, we're already really far into it. But in actuality, I need to say, I think I'm veering more towards this. And then you can begin doing the diagnostic and going back to the relationships. Okay, relationship involves myself, the caller, and the community. Is there one of those areas that I'm neglecting or, not approaching in a way that's good? And so you could begin diagnosing those relationships as well. But yeah, I think that low-grade burnout is essential to pay attention to. And you can begin paying attention to it by how you're talking to other people and how you're talking to yourself. What's the way that you're talking about work? Is it through a cynical lens, an impatient lens? Is there a short fuse there? Have we lost the ability to have empathy? Which, by the way, research shows that 80% of the people in our culture today would literally work more hours for less pay if their boss was empathetic. So this whole idea of empathy, you can check Gallup research. if we communicate with empathy to others, people are all in. But to have empathy, we need the fuel and the margin space that really creates that.
Wow. Okay. So empathy is not a natural gift of mine. I'm an Enneagram 8. So we're pretty low on empathy, and I've learned skills over the years, but it's a very interesting correlation. This is anecdotal out of my life. If I'm not doing so well on a particular day, week, season where I'm maybe, trending out of healthy toward mid-grade burnout, my empathy is one of the first things to go.
Oh, sure.
Is that a common correlation between,
yes.
Okay, so
to
you
anybody.
start to, if you notice your empathy dipping, wake up.
100%. And by the way, healthy eights are some of my favorite people because you're advocates. You see the injustice and you're like, I am not having that. This is not acceptable. So, on a good day, eights are the protectors,
That's a good reminder. Thank you.
I think that's really important. But yeah, empathy is a really good fuel gauge. So to see if that light has turned on of empty. And another way of thinking about that is this concept of humility, which I talk about in my book, is that when we're not able to operate in that space of humility, we need to immediately pull over. And I know humility is very abstract, so we can totally unpack that a bit if you'd like, but humility is the compass that will tell you the direction that you're heading in your calling. Are you going in the healthy way or the unhealthy way? If you need to know anything at all, if you were to have any sort of tool in your tool belt, humility would be the first thing to have.
Okay, so I want to come back to that. But before we get there, I want to deal with diagnosis a little bit longer. You talk, Arianna, about workaholism and calling idolization as a deadly duo. Can you unpack that?
Yeah, good. So again, if we go back to that idea of a spectrum, that burnout is not a category, it's a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
How do we wind up there? I don't know that anyone would want to say, I want to get burnt out.
It's not overnight. You're not like super healthy today and totally, trash tomorrow.
So there's a lot of things we don't have control over in the workplace. If we don't have control over, if you're working in a congregation, the type of criticism that you can get on a regular basis from congregations can be massive and personal and exhausting. We don't always have control over that. If we're not at the top, we don't always have control over bosses who have issues or who use spiritual labor inappropriately. So if you go to them and you say, this thing is happening that's hard, and they say something like, well, you better pray about it. We all have trials in this world. I mean, that's a legit response that someone I was working with was dealing with. And so we should never, ever use faith as a way of just, quieting people down. We don't have control over those things. We don't have control over whether or not we're just really worried if we can pay the bills this month. We don't have control over that necessarily. But the two things we have control over that can lead us to burnout are workaholism and job idolization. And they creep up on you. So workaholism is an addiction. It is not a compliment. We need to stop talking about it as a compliment. You can say someone has a high capacity. That's great. But workaholism is an addiction. And it starts off like any other addiction where you're doing it because it feels good. But it moves to you're doing it to avoid the bad feelings when you stop doing it. It's a compulsion. So let's take that into work. Maybe you're so used to responding to urgency, like someone just died, we need to go speak at a funeral, or, this person's in the hospital, or this family's having a marriage crisis. Can you please be there? Or for me as a faculty, it's, students having all sorts of not just assignment issues, but mental health issues and, abuse issues that happen that come up and that you have to deal with. So you're used to being the on-call person. And then there's a moment where you're not on call and it feels wildly uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And all the emotions surface and all the things and thoughts that you've been pushing down surface. And so the tendency in workaholic nature is to go and keep working because that feels controllable. My life might feel uncontrollable in other places, but that's controllable. So that's an addiction. Job idolization is a little bit different. So job idolization is when work becomes the ultimate priority. It becomes the sole reason for living. You define yourself by your job. You don't show up for people who you are committed to because of your job on a regular basis. And you use that as the excuse. So in this way, work is not just an expression of who you are. It's not, as Os Guinness, the theologian, said, do what you are versus you are what you do. And so this whole idea of figuring out work as an expression of who you are versus the definition of who you are. And when job idolization occurs, like any other idol, it becomes the thing that consumes our thoughts.
So church leaders and Christians who are living out a calling, I wonder if we are especially susceptible to this, because I know when I was at my least healthy in ministry, and I think I've somewhat disentangled myself from this, it was like, to rest is being unfaithful because I have this calling. And I was being, in my 30s, deeply rewarded because of spectacular growth in the church. So it's like, clearly Jesus is in me working more hours, and maybe it's a little chaotic at home. So I'm just going to keep at work. As you say, it's masking issues. Like, does that seem to be an occupational hazard for church leaders and Christians with a high sense of calling?
It is an occupational hazard for those who feel called in whatever profession.
So it could be, I'm called to be a doctor. I'm called to be an artist. I'm called to be a shop owner.
Because again, remember, I interviewed an NFL coach who felt like it was his calling to coach these players, not just to win the game, but to be good men. So his urgency in shaping them was not simply to win, but it was to help them be better humans.
And when is that job ever done?
It's not. And in fact,
when's the mission of the church ever done? Never.
Right, exactly. One of the things that I noticed in the data were people who felt called and managed to either avoid the depths of burnout or, when they got there, get themselves out. And there are specific things that fall into that whole humility component that we'll talk about in a minute. But this NFL coach had a special meal with his wife at the end of every season. And he said, "Tell me where I didn't show up for you this season."
Whoa.
Every season. He wanted to know, where did I fall short and what can we do about it in the future? And actually, she felt called to be his support system. They both were operating this really cool capacity together.
How do you separate who you are from what you do?
It's really hard.
I think about it I don't want to say every day, but every week, because I feel like it's a mind game, Arianna. Like, I was a pastor for 25 years, teaching and lead seat and everything like that. And now I do this in the Christian space. Well, in the marketplace, but mostly we serve Christian leaders. And, I'm like, well, I think I'm going to be okay if I don't work at this anymore. But honestly, I don't know. I've only ever done this since I was 30. And I don't know. How do you separate who you are from what you do?
Yeah, so good. So part of it is taking away the job title and going back to the skill sets and the passions that you get to do in that job.
Okay.
So I feel the same. Like, I had no idea what I wanted to do, by the way, when I was in college. I changed my major 5 times. I was one of those people that I just had no idea. I thought I wanted to work in the church. I didn't have a good experience doing that. I thought, oh my gosh, these people need to learn how to communicate. So I went back,
You're not alone. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I love being a professor. I love it so much. However, occasionally I have to remind myself, what do I love? I love mentoring. I love the opportunity to collaboratively learn. I love speaking before lots of people, and I love the one-on-one relationships. I love integrating my faith into what I'm teaching. Could I do all of those things in another job if I wasn't a professor? Probably. And so figuring out that the skill sets and the passions that God has given you, those are you. But how you're able to do them in your job, that could look different in a variety of ways. My father was also a pastor for a while. He's like so gifted. He's everything I learned about good communication comes from him and my mom. But his public speaking persona and his shepherding heart, when he speaks, you listen. and he's gentle and kind. But he ended up stopping his job as a pastor because he grew up with a single mom in the South, and he really felt called to be a dad and a husband. And he saw the conflicting nature of that when he was doing his pastoral work. So he and my mom went on to be real estate agents. And that pastoral sense he used to rock it as a realtor. He prayed for his clients and on the side gig, he had small groups that he was a part of. He became a chaplain for first responders. He still did pastoral work. It just wasn't in the role of pastor.
I think that's a really helpful framing, because I think a lot of us imagine if I stop this role, whatever this role is, the tap turns off overnight. And the reality is, when you're going through your inventory, I think about it. What do I love doing? Well, I love contributing. I love shaping ideas. I love connecting with people and having great conversations, hence the podcast. I do love speaking in front of people. And as much these days, connecting with people off stage as much as I love being on stage. But I love that connection in the church and leadership space. I love talking to atheist thought leaders about their faith. And yeah, right now my job enables all of that. But that doesn't necessarily mean if this ends tomorrow, and I hope it doesn't, I hope there's many years left. But if it does, that just means I can reinvent new ways of using those skills in the future. Is
Absolutely.
that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
And I think when we do that, we don't hold to our calling with tight fists.
Right.
We hold to our calling with grateful, open hands. And so that is where we begin focusing on the caller who equipped us with these skills, who is capable and able to give us more opportunities to develop more skills and even discover new passions. I mean, I love doing consulting work. As much as I love teaching, when I get to work with churches and organizations on healthy communication practices, and we talk about how to have healthy conflict in the workplace, or the role of listening styles, or the need for structure in decision-making, when we talk about that and I see people's eyes light up, it feels like part of my calling.
Mm-hmm. Another framing I've heard that I've found helpful, I'll give him credit, Brad Lomenick. I don't know that you know Brad, he's amazing, but been a frequent appearer on this podcast. I remember when I stepped into the lead pastor role, he says, no, your calling didn't shift, your assignment did. In other words, you're called, but now you have a new assignment. So imagine being a member of the military. It's like I was deployed here, but now I'm deployed there, right? That kind of thing. Is that a helpful framing as well of how to think of it?
I think it can be. I guess, though, I would say, though, that calling itself can grow and develop, and we can have seasonal callings. We can have multiple callings.
Sure.
So I do like that idea of that your assignment changed. I would just go back to your relationship with your caller is constantly on the move,
Yeah.
And I think if we can be open to the fact that actually it can grow and it can move. But the Lord is faithful. He is a faithful caller. He's a teacher. He's a rabbi. He wants us to sit at his feet and learn. He wants us to ask questions. He's the kind of teacher who says, smart people ask questions. What's your next question?
So is it an unhelpful thing then? Because a lot of people, when they get called into full-time ministry, like pastoral ministry, are like, this is a lifelong calling. Is that a false dichotomy? Is that a false assumption?
That assumption makes me nervous.
Okay.
I think that our lifelong calling is to love God and love others. And maybe we needed to go back here for a minute to talk about primary calling versus secondary calling.
Yeah.
As believers, we are all called, all of us, to love God and love others. Same coin, different side. How we love God is how we love others. When we're loving others well, we are loving God. And he's also made us with specific skill sets and passions that when we have the opportunity to leverage those, we feel like we're worshiping the Lord. So I think I would feel concerned for someone to say this job is your lifelong calling. I'm not sure that any research I know backs that up. And when I think of scripture components, I don't know of any story of someone in the Bible where that really could be the case.
Yeah, well, the common argument we look at Moses, he died with his boots on, that kind of thing. But I think that's and the people who say it the loudest are the people who are the unhealthiest.
For sure. Yes.
They're the ones hanging on when everyone else says you should have tapped out a few years ago. Okay. You've mentioned this a few times, but humility. Can we unpack that a little bit? Like, how does humility address everything that we've been talking about, including toxic calling, burnout, all of those things?
Yeah. So I think that humility has been not that I'm humble, but the study of humility has been following me along for a really long time. Actually, in junior high, I went to a Christian school, and we had to select a verse that would be like our verse for that year. And my verse was from Ephesians 4, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. I did that when I was 12, and I remember it. Fast forward to the third year of my job at Biola, I was starting to feel work burnout. That was the one that I talk about in the book. I was on too many committees and teaching an overload. I finally got engaged. I was planning a wedding, and I was very burnt out. And so I saw this fellowship, a research fellowship. I didn't even look to see what the topic was, Carey. I'm like, I need an out. And with this fellowship, you only teach half a load. So I thought, as much as I love teaching, I need a little bit of a break. So I signed up for this, and I realized it was for humility, to study humility. So for a semester, I was in a room with all these other scholars, about 10 of us from across the world, studying the virtue of humility. And it was interesting. What I thought was interesting is that nobody can really agree on a definition. It can mean a lot of different things. But when I began looking at the data of humility, the descriptions, and then I was reflecting on the people who I've interviewed who managed to have healthy calling, they literally overlapped on each other in 3 specific ways. Humility, communicated, enacted, has 3 components to it. It's a relational endeavor, by the way, humility. It's relational. And the first is that you are aware of your strengths and you are aware of your weaknesses, and you're not distracted by either one. So humility means knowing who you are. You are aware of your strengths. You know what you're good at, because you look at all sorts of books like Jim Collins' Good to Great, or anything by Patrick Lencioni, like anything where they talk about what a great leader is, they always talk about humility. Yeah. Humility paired with something. Because when you're in the workplace, you don't want to work with someone who doesn't know what they're good at. That's called incompetence.
Yeah. Humble, but useless. Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's not really humble. It's because a humility is, I know what I'm good at. I'm not afraid of what I'm good at. I'm just not distracted by it. And also humility is, I know where my weaknesses are, and I'm not letting those get in the way either. Like, because that's not the focus. The focus is gratitude. Right? So humility is not a distraction with your strengths or your weaknesses, but gratitude for the opportunities presented. That's the first thing. The second thing is that humility has to do with lifelong learning. You think about how someone who's humble knows there's always more to learn. Yeah. And diagnostically, you can go to each of these components and say, okay, where am I fitting in this? Diagnostically, that means that you're not defensive in meetings where someone has a different idea, because a humble person knows there's always more to learn. A humble person has no problem delegating and saying, you know what? I could do this. I might even do it better, but I'm going to give it to this other person because I don't have to do it. I'm going to figure this out. So the ability to know your strengths and weaknesses and not be distracted by either, but be motivated from a place of gratitude. Gratitude is that key there. Being a lifelong learner, someone who values that. I think in the church especially, we can get used to the rhythm and the culture so that we think we've got it all figured out. We have to keep learning. We have to keep learning. That third part of humility is the ability to walk away. And that's where Sabbath is. So not all the time, not like in a irresponsible way, but in the ability to say, you know what? I have to take a break. As many theologians have noted, the first thing that God called holy in the Bible was Sabbath rest. He did it. It's actually a gift that we get to do it. And what's interesting, this is kind of a side tangent because I could talk about Sabbath all day long. I know that people like to pair Sabbath and solitude, and they do often go together, but Sabbath is also a relational act, right?
You're talking about like Sabbath dinners, that kind of thing?
Sabbath dinners, being with community in a way that reminds you to look up and look out and take a breath. And I think, I remember when I was Sabbathing as a single person, I really was lonely all the time because I had the wrong idea of what Sabbath was. And
you mentioned Annie F. Downs. She says the same thing as a single woman. She's like, the pastor might say, all right, just go home, turn off your phones and, don't go out of your house. And she's like, well, as a single person, that's a death sentence.
It is a death sentence.
So you may want to say, actually connect with your friends and do something off the grid with them and build community and celebrate.
Yes. And my tendency when I was single was to overschedule because I was so afraid of being lonely. Mm. And so learning, okay, who of my friends gives me life?
Yeah.
And I need to pursue those people that day. Now, as a young family with a young kid, Sabbathing looks very different because we are always busy and we are always active. And so remembering that Sabbath might include physical rest, but really what it's about is emotional, spiritual, mental renewal. And there's a lot of ways that you can do that. I remember when my husband and I came across two different texts that really changed the way we Sabbath. One is Gary Thomas's Sacred Pathways, where you learn about the 9 different ways. Love that book so much. The other one though is just, it's an article and I believe a talk through TED by Dr. Dalton Smith on the 7 types of rest. And I think we've kind of taken a westernized cultural approach to rest that sometimes gets it wrong. For some people, rest is contemplative. That is me. I'm a contemplative. I like to be in nature and I like to sort of slow down. But my husband, Enneagram 3, that would be like a punishment for him. He needs to play. He needs to have a sense of play and fun and active achievement that's like playful. And so those 7 types of rest will help you determine where are you feeling the most depleted. Do you need sensory rest? Do you need creative rest? What kind of rest do you need to do in that moment? So all that to say, humility involves the ability to take a break and know that if you walk away, if everything falls apart, in Jim Collins' famous book, Good to Great, he distinguishes between a good leader and a great leader. One of the distinguishing factors is a good leader, if they walk away, the organization falls apart. It's great when they're there, but if they walk away, nobody knows what to do really. But a great leader, if they take a moment, take a break, everything works just fine because people know who they are. They know what their roles are. They know what to do. There's a shared trust to keep going.
So the opposite of humility is pride. Mm-hmm. And I've heard it said that pride and greed are the hardest things to see in the mirror. You ask a greedy person, are you greedy? I'm not greedy. I'm not proud, right? Like that's really hard to see. You've already hinted at the inverse with the 3 aspects of humility. But just for leaders who may be uncertain, what are some signs that maybe pride is an issue? And that's a live issue for me. I'm working with my therapist right now on some signs of pride that I probably didn't think were present in my life that are very present in my life. So it's a very live topic. So hence the question.
I think it's a constant topic. Good for you for talking about it.
Listen, it's not fun. I didn't say it was fun, Arianna.
No, it's definitely not fun.
Not enjoying this, but it is perhaps necessary.
I think some of the signs of pride. So again, if you were to look at that diagnostically of humility and you were to take the inverse, that first part of humility is not being distracted by your strengths or weaknesses. So one face of pride, pride is the greatest vice. And theologians talk about the sort of the birthplace of that. Well, humility is known as the mother of all virtues. And so one question would be, am I really distracted right now by what I can contribute? Am I like feeling like I'm the only one that can do this? Or on the flip side, am I so consumed with all my mistakes right now? I tend to be that one. Like I tend to be overly aware of what I'm not doing well, that it's getting in the way, that I'm operating from a place of insecurity or scarcity. That would be one way.
This is not, I like that sign because it's not so much look at how great I am, or look at how many views I got, or look how full the room is, which is classic, like almost narcissistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what you're talking about here is I've got to keep contributing. I'm needed. Like that can be a sign. And
Absolutely. I'm the only one.
I'm the only one who can do this. Why does
I
this
see
always
the
come
need.
to me?
I can, or I can do this. Other people, they have too much going on, but I can do this. This is me. I can do this. I have these skill sets. I can step in here, and it feels so good. I mean, by the way, when we were talking about workaholism earlier, research shows that they're the ones that get more opportunities in work, right?
Yeah, you get a raise and a promotion, right? Workaholics do.
Workaholics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And okay, that's helpful. Any other signs for pride? Because it is invisible. Yeah.
It is so invisible, and it can masquerade on the side of ego or insecurity. So both of those are signs of pride. So the second one would be learning. So thinking about, am I really unwilling to take time for questions in my meetings?
Mm-hmm.
Have I allowed space for other people to brainstorm or have other ideas? Am I impatiently making choices because I don't want to deal with any more ideas? And certainly there's decision fatigue, and you can't include everybody all the time, but has the ability to learn gone out the window? I would even say in this day and age when there's so much going on, like socially and politically and everything, am I only choosing one person to listen to because I'm just too tired to listen to multiple ideas? That can get dangerous. We need to cross-reference what we're learning. We need to take some time. I think also being a student is a very vulnerable thing. As a professor, I sometimes try to place myself in the role of student by taking a class or learning something new. And my goodness, having to learn something new, realizing you don't know it, being messy, being a beginner is very vulnerable.
Well, and being the senior leader, people come to you for answers, so you can very easily become the answer machine, the expert, and that just calcifies your thinking to the point, well, of course I know the answers. And okay.
And it can feel good to know the answers. It can feel really good to be the person that people go to. There's 5 types of social power when we're talking about power. And the first 2 are just really easy. That's reward or coercion. So when you're in a position of power, you have the ability to be like, I can do this for you, or I can take this away. So those are very easy. But the other 3 types, there's one that's expert power. And so you're the person people come to. There's referent power, which is like likability and charisma. So you have power by just that social, like that woo factor. And then there's legitimate power, which is the title that you hold. And by the way, the least powerful of all 5 of those is legitimate power. On its own, it has very little power because people can see right away if you can back that up with something else. Expert power often has the most, followed with referent or charisma. So I think that someone who's in danger of being overtaken by pride needs to be careful how much they value their ability to be the one people go to as always knowing what's right.
Do you love being the expert? Do you love?
I know.
Yeah.
And it's not that you can't enjoy that quality about yourself, but finding places in your life that almost force you to be a student. I mean, even Carey, as you invite us on here, people to come and share ideas, you're learning along the way as well. You're providing your expertise, but you're learning. That's a really great, healthy place to be.
Just a question for you. Like in my personal life, after burnout, which was almost 20 years ago now, I've been trying to cultivate new hobbies. So 10 years ago, it was barbecue, which I love. It's great. Still trying to, perfect ribs. But I picked up calligraphy as just something like I know nothing about, can't even hold a pen properly, can barely read my own writing. So I'm studying that this year. A couple of years ago, took up skiing again for the first time since my kids were little. My wife and I go skiing. Can like putting yourself into places, even in life, where you're the beginner in the class, be a helpful way of combating pride?
100%. I'm going to high five you across the screen right now because that is so awesome. Yeah. So there was this one doctor that I interviewed who felt called, a primary care doctor. And I remember going into his office and I was, had one of those offices where there was just super messy, but he knew where everything was, and there were drawings on the wall from his grandkids, which he delighted in so much. But there was also a certificate. And I asked him about it. And I asked him in relation to something else, what do you do on a bad day? When you feel called and you've had a bad day, what do you do? And he began telling me a story that he actually started taking Italian classes at a community college.
Oh.
And he took this little certificate off the wall, and it was a frame that said most improved student. And he was just so delighted with himself that he had grown in this community college class. And he said, I take my superhero cape off. I take my doctor coat off, and I go for a walk with my wife, and I take classes at a community college, and I spend time with my grandkids. I try not to take it all too seriously. So I do think one of the ways to protect yourself is to always be a student somewhere in your life.
That's excellent. Okay, there's a term I've got to get to before we wrap up: boundary shaming. What is boundary shaming? How do leaders do it?
Oh, gosh. So this is a phenomenon that I sort of gave a name to when I was studying this. And boundary shaming is when you are being asked to do more than what you've signed up for. So let's be very clear. You're doing your job. You're doing all the tasks that you've been asked to do. Nothing is being ignored or forgotten. You're doing your job. But when you're asked to do more, with the understanding that if you don't, you're not a team player. If you don't, you might not be the person people call on next time. It's when someone else puts their own capacity for work on you as if it should be what it is for all people.
Isn't that every church and every nonprofit, Arianna?
Well, maybe, yes. And so the problem is, it often is it's a micro discourse. And so it happens often in small ways that are hard to spot. And so it makes it harder to respond with boundaries. And Cloud and Townsend are merging those, are of course the leaders in talking about boundaries. But boundaries essentially are when you remember who you are and what you value, and you live that out.
So pre-burnout me was a very different person than post-burnout me. There's still relics and remnants, but I remember this probably a year or two after burnout, I was very guilty of that. Like if you weren't all in and you weren't available, not 24/7, but maybe 14 hours a day, like, come on, this is the mission. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you, is I recognize myself in the problem. But I remember one day I was texting someone on a Saturday morning because, as a leader, your ideas come without regard for the clock. And I remember her, she was my director of operations, XP. And I remember she was saying, are we ever going to get a Saturday not to talk about church?
Oof.
Yeah. Well, good for her for saying that. And that was like 15 years ago. It was very paradigm shifting for me. And now we have very strict boundaries, but I still see that as very common and in the church. So let's talk to people who are not the senior leader, who are being boundary shamed, who are getting the 8 p.m. texts every other night, the weekend. Oh, I just had a new idea for a great new direction on the sermon Saturday at noon, and that interrupted their day with their family. What do you do if you are the person on the receiving end of the boundary shaming?
First of all, I'm sorry when you're on the receiving end. It's a hard place to be. I've been there. And it's confusing. Part of the boundary shaming process is that you so desperately want to contribute and you believe in the cause and you want to prove yourself. And depending on where you are in the job ladder, especially if you're new, there's also this mentality that you have to work hard and work more. Again, this happens a lot with people who are single because the assumption is they have all this extra time.
You don't have a life. That's right.
Which is terrible. I remember being asked to do all this stuff, and then someone else was also asked, and they said, I have to go home to my spouse. And I wanted to be like, I have to go home to my ice cream. Like, I wanted to figure out a way to be like, I also need to go home, you know?
Yeah.
So I would say first, see if you can ask for a value-based meeting on a semi-regular basis. Like, can you have a meeting to say, all right, can we revisit what are our values as a team? What are the expectations? How will I know if something is urgent? So there's some people who feel like, hey, if I email you, it's not urgent, but if I text you, it's urgent, right? There's these like,
we have that in our company. We have a hierarchy, like it all sits in Asana for a meeting. And if it can't wait a week, it goes to Slack. If it's semi-urgent, you get a text during business hours. If it's a nuclear emergency, you get a phone call.
I love that. So I think having those markers to delineate between what is urgent and what isn't might be an important place to start. Just ask some questions. Hey, I want to attend to this. I see the value of it. Can we walk through the deadline pace, or, what are the expectations of this? Also, what are our values about this? Do we work past 6 p.m.? And what's really tricky, and I know for myself, a lot of times I don't have a chance to email people until like 11 o'clock at night because, I've got this kid and I've got a spouse and some sick parents and all these other things. But then you have to do that timed response or make a note for yourself and not send it until the next day.
Right. Or like you say, the timed response, just in Gmail, it's like send at 8 a.m. the next morning. You can do that in Slack too. Can I ask another question? Because right now some leaders would say, well, the mission, I get it. Like, don't text people every week after hours and that kind of thing. But the mission is important. And once in a while, there are issues. And I would say right now with our team, if you interviewed my small team, they would probably say a handful, like literally one handful of times over the course of a year, I might get an evening or weekend text.
Sure.
Cool or not cool? Like totally, if it's the exception, not the rule. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because the opposite is bureaucratic culture where it's, it's 4 o'clock and we don't do anything after 4. And
I was doing a consulting gig with a group of people earlier this week, and I was talking to the VP beforehand just to find out what his needs were and his expectations were so I could understand some backstory. And he mentioned that a younger person on his staff wasn't responding to emails as fast as he wanted. And so I said, well, have you talked about it? And he said, no. And I said, we have to be really explicit about our expectations of communication return. Because if you're not explicit, that's when resentment and frustration can occur. And so just saying, hey, if you don't have time to respond to this, can you at least let me know that you saw it? Can you send me an email that says,
acknowledgement.
Thanks for your email. I'll get back to you within 48 hours. Or thanks for your email. I'll get back to you on Monday. And just because, so this actually goes to an interesting problem in the workplace as it relates to technology. About 70% of communication is nonverbal.
Yeah.
So if we're not having a face-to-face conversation and it's through text or email, we've lost 70%. Which means we're only operating with a 30% capacity to understand the meaning. We don't have context. We don't have a greater sense of intention. And so we have to be explicitly clear in emails and text and all sorts of other technological ways of communicating when we can't see and hear that other part of the communication. You have to over-communicate a lot. Over-communication needs to be a good word.
I tell my staff when they onboard the new ones, it's like, you cannot over-communicate. And if you do, I will let you know. I do not remember the last time I had to let someone know.
That's right.
Over-communicate. One fascinating finding, if I've got this right, is that I believe you say that those who identify with a calling but cannot pursue it have a higher incidence of depression than those who even never defined a calling. We've been talking about boundaries around calling, which is a big issue, I think, for most of the people in my audience because they're consumed by calling. But if you feel a calling but can't pursue it, that results in depression. Can you explain those findings?
I mean, those aren't even my initial findings. The data backs this up across the board. Vocational psychologists did a variety of studies about that. And I have also seen that in my own interviews and research and data. But here's the problem. If you feel that pull, if you feel that longing, if you have identified the thirst to make an impact and you sense the need, but you're not able to do it, it is so awful. It's so awful. So I work with students who desperately want to know their calling. They're in college. They're like, I just want to know. And I actually teach a senior course on communication and calling in the workplace. And we walk through this process. And I tell them at the outset, you're not probably going to have any more clarity at the end of this time.
Okay, great. I was going to say, do we have time to talk about that today?
Yeah. But you'll have tools. You'll have tools to put on your tool belt so that when you walk through life, you'll know how to make sense of these things. that longing to have a calling is very strong. But when you feel like you've had that, and I've talked with many people, and that sense of calling has been cut off, either because they have to pay the bills and they didn't have the space to do that anymore, or they're caregiving in a certain way that doesn't allow for that. And it is really, really, really hard.
Yeah, it's that whole idea of Viktor Frankl and everything, just like your search for meaning, purpose, contribution. So, I understand that. That's a very, any youth pastor listening or anyone who's got kids, what am I supposed to do with my life? What has God called me to do, right? Those are very real questions.
It's very, very real. I do think that the strategy of job crafting is very helpful. I don't know.
Yeah, can you explain that?
Yeah, so job crafting is when you're doing a job that you either like or don't like, but you don't love, and it doesn't feel like a calling, but you so desperately want that. There are 3 things that you can do in job crafting. The first is task crafting. And that's where you look at all the tasks that you need to do and you decide, is there one that you can either give to someone else that really does not bring you life? Or is there something you can add? And yes, it would be more work, but it actually gives you life. So that's a task crafting strategy. The relational crafting strategy is the second one. And that's where you examine, who am I spending time with in the workplace? What do my relational workplace interactions look like? Are they people that bring me life? Or are they people that bring me down? I mean, I remember being part of a text thread where people needed a place to vent. And I get it. That's a sacred space. But that venting turned into complaining. And for me personally, it was not healthy anymore.
Sure.
So I needed to walk away from that. I remember when I was working in a church for a short time, I shared a space with someone who's so negative. Just the gift of complaining. So I literally had to be in my car during lunch just by myself, and I'm an extrovert, listening to gospel music because I just needed some pumping of encouragement before I went back in there. And then I sought people out. So that second one, relational crafting, is when you decide, I need to limit my interactions with some of these people, and I need to pursue my interactions with these people who I actually I want to adopt that mindset. The third thing is cognitive crafting. So you've got task crafting, relational crafting. Cognitive crafting is remembering the bigger why. Simon Sinek is so great when he talks about why, and so why am I doing this? What value does this have? What is the greater impact here? And one of the things I would suggest for people who are really in that place of not feeling called, but having that desire, is try doing one of these for 1 month and then switch to the next one. So take 3 months, do task crafting for 1 month. See if there's something you can either give to someone else or take on, and just see how that goes for a month. Second month, see how you can modify who you interact with so that you are around people who are life-giving to some extent.
And that always has to be intentional, doesn't it?
Has to be intentional.
I mean, the life-giving relationships take work.
Yes.
And the draining people just seem to show up. I don't know how that happens.
They're real easy to find. And they're very welcoming,
and
usually.
They find you.
And then that last one of why are you doing this? At the end of the day, this goes back to our primary calling. I'm loving God and I'm loving others. If you're a stay-at-home parent and you're loving your kid, that kid is going to school or going to interact with other kids, and that's going to impact things. If you are a staff member at a church and you feel like your job is menial and unseen, first of all, most of the time, nothing can survive without the folks who are just doing that sort of staff-focused administrative stuff. You are the lifeblood of the team. But figuring out that greater why. And if you don't know, that's a sign to pull over and take a break.
Yeah. Is there anything else I need to ask you about that we haven't talked about today, Arianna?
There's so many good things we have talked about. I've so enjoyed this. I think we've talked about a lot of things. I guess I would say that third C of community is often the forgotten C. And so I would say we need to think more about how our community that we have or don't have impacts us and the community that we serve, because that really plays a role in what we're doing. I don't know if you feel this way. You can think about different church services, like the 9 o'clock versus the 11 o'clock and how they react to your message. Or I think about classes. I teach the same class, but different students, and how literally the people make a difference.
They do.
And so, my best friend and she and I have a standing phone call at 4:30 on Tuesdays. And we take 1 hour and we have a conversation. And that is a reorienting place for me. She is part of my community. And so I think we need to go back and think about how community impacts what we're doing as it relates to accountability and also support.
One thing that's become clear reading between the lines or listening between the lines in this conversation is how intentional you are about community. Between your board of directors, between your best friend Tuesday at 4:30, this is not something that just randomly assembles.
No, you have to pursue it. And I think there's an element of vulnerability with that. We need that support. We were meant to be in community. We are relational beings designed after a relational God. And so anytime we lose focus of the relationship, we get into trouble.
Well, your latest book is called Healthy Calling: From Toxic Burnout to Sustainable Work. It's available everywhere. Arianna, if people want to connect with you online, what's a good place for them to find you?
Yeah, you can go to ariannamolloy.com. I have lots of resources there, other videos and other things. And I would just be delighted to talk with anyone who needs to process any of this. I don't have all the answers. I'm still figuring it out.
Yeah.
But I love talking about it. And I think it's a journey worth fighting for.
Could not agree more. And thank you so much for being with us today.
It was a pleasure.